Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The Kiss That Changed Everything. Marlena stood in the church parking lot at 3 a.m. with her hand pressed against the car window, watching her husband of 30 years kiss another woman in the front seat of their Ford Explorer. The streetlight above them flickered like it was trying to look away too. She'd driven there because someone had texted her an address and a time, nothing else, and now she understood why. Pastor Gregory's hand was tangled in the woman's hair, the same way he used to touch Marlena back when they were young and broke and full of dreams about saving souls together. The woman was young, maybe 25, wearing a church usher uniform that Marlena herself had ironed that morning. Her lipstick was smeared across Gregory's collar, bright red like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Marlena's knees went soft, but she didn't fall. She spent 3 decades holding herself up when everything around her was crumbling, and tonight would be no different. She backed away from the car slowly, her heels clicking on the asphalt like a countdown. And when she reached her own vehicle, she didn't cry. She just sat there with her hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, feeling like the whole world had been a lie she'd been too faithful to question. She drove home in silence, no gospel music, no prayers, just the sound of tires on wet pavement and her own breathing. The house was dark when she pulled into the driveway, the same house they'd bought 28 years ago when the church was just 12 people meeting in a rented gymnasium. She'd painted every wall, planted every rose bush, cooked 1,000 meals in that kitchen for deacons and missionaries, and visiting preachers who told her she was blessed to have a man like Gregory. Blessed. The word tasted like poison now. She walked inside and didn't turn on any lights. She didn't want to see the pictures on the walls, all those smiling photos of them at church anniversaries and conferences and mission trips. She didn't want to see the Bible on the coffee table with Gregory's notes in the margins, his handwriting so neat and confident, like he really believed he was a man of God. She sat on the couch in the dark and finally let herself feel it. The sharp ache of betrayal that started in her chest and spread through her whole body like venom. 30 years. 30 years of being the perfect pastor's wife, of biting her tongue during board meetings, of smiling when women flirted with him after service, of raising their 2 daughters alone while he traveled for conferences and leadership seminars. The clock on the wall ticked past 4 a.m, and she heard his car pull up. She didn't move. She listened to him fumble with his keys at the front door, heard him curse softly when he dropped them, heard him finally get the door open and step inside. He froze when he saw her sitting there in the dark, and even though she couldn't see his face clearly, she could feel his panic like a living thing in the room. "Marlena," he said, his voice too loud for the quiet house, too casual for what he'd just done. "What are you doing up?" She turned her head slowly to look at him, and in the pale light coming through the window, she could see the lipstick still on his collar, the guilt written all over his face like graffiti. "I know," she said, and those 2 words landed between them like stones. He opened his mouth to lie. She could see him preparing the denial, reaching for the smooth words that had always worked before, but she held up her hand to stop him. "I saw you, Gregory. I saw you with her in the parking lot." His face changed then, the mask slipping, and for a moment she saw something she'd never seen before, something cold and mean. "You followed me," he said, and his voice was sharp now, angry, like she was the one who'd done something wrong. "You been spying on me, Marlena?" She stood up slowly, her legs steadier than she expected, her voice quiet but hard as iron. "That's what you got to say to me right now? After 30 years, after everything I sacrificed, you really standing in my house asking me about spying?" He took a step toward her, and she saw him decide something, saw him switch tactics the way he did. when a sermon wasn't landing right. His face softened, his shoulders dropped, and he reached out like he was going to touch her. Baby, listen, it's not what you think. That girl, she's been struggling spiritually, and I was just counseling her, and things got confused. Don't you dare, Marlena said, and her voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare stand in front of me and insult my intelligence with that weak mess. I saw you, Gregory. I saw how you touched her. That wasn't counseling. That was you throwing away 30 years like it meant nothing. He stared at her, and she saw the moment he decided to stop pretending. His face went cold again, defensive, and when he spoke, his voice was full of blame. Maybe if you'd been a better wife, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs, but she didn't let him see her flinch. She'd spent 30 years swallowing pain for the sake of peace, for the sake of the church, for the sake of keeping their family together. But something inside her had broken tonight, something that couldn't be fixed with prayer or patience or pretending. She walked past him toward the bedroom, her shoulder brushing his, and she spoke without looking back. Pack your things and get out of my house. He laughed, actually laughed, like she told a joke. This is my house, Marlena. My name on the deed, my church that paid for it, my reputation that built everything we got. You really think you can just throw me out? She stopped in the doorway and turned to face him one last time. And when she spoke, her voice was so calm, it scared even her. Try me. She closed the bedroom door behind her and locked it, and for the first time in 30 years, Marlena Davis slept alone in her own bed, not knowing that her whole life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Chapter 2, The Woman in the Mirror. 3 months passed, and Marlena barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. The woman staring back at her had lost 15 pounds she didn't need to lose. Her eyes looked hollow, like someone had scooped out all the light, and her hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn for decades, because that's what pastors' wives were supposed to look like. Respectable, modest, invisible. She'd filed for divorce the week after she caught Gregory, hired a lawyer named Patricia who wore red lipstick and didn't take mess from anybody. And now the whole church was treating her like she'd committed the unforgivable sin. Women who used to hug her after service crossed the street when they saw her coming. The deacon board had called her in for a meeting where 6 men sat around a table and told her she needed to forgive her husband, submit to his leadership, remember her vows before God. Not one of them mentioned, the lipstick on his collar or the 25-year-old usher who'd suddenly moved to Atlanta. When she walked out of that meeting, she kept walking right out of the church building, and she hadn't been back since. Her daughters were grown now, both living in different states with families of their own, and they called her every day with the same worried voices, asking if she was eating, if she was sleeping, if she thought about going back to church and working things out with the Father. They didn't understand what it felt like to discover that your whole life had been built on sand. They'd grown up watching their parents lead worship, counsel troubled couples, pray over sick babies in hospital rooms. They thought Gregory was a good man who'd made a mistake, and they couldn't understand why Marlena wouldn't just forgive him like the Bible said. But Marlena knew things they didn't know, had seen things over the years she'd trained herself to ignore. The way money disappeared from their joint account and reappeared as gifts for women in the congregation. The late-night phone calls he took in his office with the door locked. The way he'd stopped touching her years ago, stopped looking at her like she mattered, stopped seeing her as anything but the woman who kept his house clean and his reputation intact. She'd started working at a library downtown just to get out of the house, to be around people who didn't know her story, didn't look at her with pity or judgment. The library was old and beautiful with high ceilings and wooden floors that creaked when you walked, and it smelled like paper and possibility. She worked the circulation desk, checking out books and helping people find what they were looking for. and it was the first job she'd had in 30 years that was hers, that had nothing to do with being a pastor's wife. Her co-worker was a young woman named Destiny, who wore her natural hair in thick coils and talked about boundaries and self-care like they were normal things everyone should have. Destiny didn't know about Gregory or the church or any of it, and Marlena liked it that way. She liked being just Marlena, not pastor's wife Marlena, not First Lady Marlena, just a woman who loved books and could recommend a good mystery novel or help a kid find something for a school report. It felt like breathing after being underwater for 3 decades. One Thursday afternoon, a man came to the circulation desk with a stack of books about architecture and Islamic art. And when Marlena scanned his library card, she saw his name was Kareem Hassan. He was maybe 50, with gray in his beard and kind eyes that smiled even when his mouth didn't. And he dressed neat in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt like he was coming from somewhere important. "Thank you," he said when she handed him his books, and his voice had an accent she couldn't quite place, something that made the words sound like music. She nodded and watched him walk away, then forgot about him until the next week, when he came back with the same books and checked out 5 more. This time he asked her for a recommendation, said he was new to the area and trying to learn about American literature, and without thinking she suggested Their Eyes Were Watching God, because it was her favorite, the book she'd read a dozen times when she needed to remember what it felt like to have a voice. He smiled at her, really smiled, and said, "Thank you, Marlena," reading her name off her name tag. And something about the way he said it made her feel seen. For the first time in months, he started coming to the library every Thursday like clockwork, always polite, always asking her about books. And slowly they began to talk about more than literature. He told her he was a civil engineer who'd moved to Richmond from Egypt 5 years ago, that he had a daughter studying medicine in Boston, that his wife had died from cancer 3 years back, and he was still learning how to live without her. Marlena found herself looking forward to Thursdays, found herself thinking about what she might recommend next, found herself wearing colors other than the muted beige and grays she'd worn for years. She told him about the library, about the books she loved, about growing up in South Carolina with a grandmother who taught her to read before she started school. She didn't tell him about Gregory or the church or the divorce, and he didn't push. He just listened like her words mattered, like she was interesting, like she was more than just someone's discarded wife. One Thursday, he brought her tea from a Middle Eastern grocery store, said it was Egyptian hibiscus and would help her relax. And when their fingers touched as she took the cup, something shifted in her chest, something that felt dangerous and alive and terrifying. She went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about his smile. Chapter 3, the first dinner. Kareem asked her to dinner on a rainy Thursday in October, his voice nervous in a way that made him seem younger than his years. And Marlena said yes before she could talk herself out of it. They met at a small Ethiopian restaurant on the north side of town, the kind of place with low lighting and music that sounded like prayer. And when she walked in, he stood up so fast he almost knocked over his water glass. She'd worn a burgundy dress she'd bought the week before, the first dress she'd chosen for herself in years. And when he told her she looked beautiful, she believed him. They sat across from each other at a small wooden table, and the awkwardness lasted maybe 30 seconds before they fell into the easy conversation they always had, talking about books and travel and the way cities change but people stay the same. He told her about growing up in Cairo, about watching the Nile at sunrise and thinking the whole world was gold, about leaving everything behind to build a better life, and then losing his wife before they could enjoy it together. His voice broke when he talked about her, and Marlena reached across the table without thinking and touched his hand. The food came on a large platter, meant for sharing, colorful stews and vegetables piled on spongy injera bread. And he showed her how to tear off pieces and scoop up the food with her hands, laughing when she was clumsy at first. It felt intimate in a way she hadn't expected, sharing food from the same plate, licking spices off her fingers, watching him watch her with something warm in his eyes. He asked her about her life, and she found herself telling him the truth, all of it. The 30 years with Gregory, the betrayal, the church that chose him over her, the way she'd lost herself somewhere along the way and was just now starting to find the pieces. He listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or Bible verses or empty platitudes. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are braver than you know, Marlena. Walking away from a life you built takes more courage than staying ever could." His words settled into her chest like warm honey, and she realized she'd been starving for someone to see her strength instead of her failure. They talked until the restaurant started closing around them, the staff wiping down tables and stacking chairs while they sat in their corner booth forgetting the world existed. He told her about his faith, about Islam and prayer, and the peace he found in submission to God, and she was surprised to find herself interested instead of defensive. She'd been taught her whole life that Muslims were the enemy, that their God was different from hers, that their way was wrong. But sitting across from Kareem, listening to him talk about mercy and compassion and seeking God's will, she heard echoes of everything she believed before the church made her faith feel like a cage. He asked her about Christianity, and she talked about the Jesus she used to know, the one who loved outcasts and challenged religious leaders and told women they mattered. Not the version Gregory preached, the one that kept women silent and obedient, but the real one, the revolutionary one, the one she'd fallen in love with as a girl. Kareem smiled and said, "I think our gods might not be so different after all." And she felt something crack open inside her, something that had been closed for a very long time. When he walked her to her car, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the streetlights like scattered diamonds, and they stood in the parking lot not wanting the night to end. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't even try to hug her, just looked at her with those kind eyes and said, "Can I see you again?" She said yes, and then she said, "Kareem, I need you to know something. I'm not looking for another man to take care of me or fix me or save me. I spent 30 years being someone's wife, and I'm just now learning who Marlena is. If we do this, if we see where this goes, I need you to know I'm coming as a whole person, not a broken thing that needs repair." He nodded slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was serious. "And I need you to know that I see you exactly that way. You are not broken, Marlena. You are a woman who survived something that would have destroyed most people. You are strong and brilliant and beautiful. And if you let me walk beside you, I promise I will never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are." She drove home that night with tears on her face, but for the first time in months, they were good tears. Over the next 6 weeks, they saw each other 3 times a week, always meeting somewhere neutral, always careful to keep things slow and respectful. They went to museums and walked through parks and sat in coffee shops arguing about poetry. He introduced her to his daughter Amara on a video call, and Amara was warm and funny and told Marlena embarrassing stories about Kareem that made him blush. Marlena told her own daughter she was dating someone, and their reactions were mixed. Her older daughter, Shanice, was cautiously supportive, said she just wanted her mother to be happy. Her younger daughter, Trina, was horrified, demanded to know if Marlena had lost her mind, dating someone so soon after the divorce, dating someone who wasn't even Christian. Marlena listened to Trina's concerns and then said something she'd never said before. "Baby, I love you, but this is my life. I've spent 30 years living for other people's approval, and I'm done. I'm dating Kareem because he makes me laugh and he treats me with respect and he sees me as a person, not a position. If that bothers you, I'm sorry, but I'm not stopping." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Trina said, "I don't even know who you are anymore, Mama." And hung up. That night, Marlena sat in her living room, staring at the photos on the wall, all those pictures of her life before, and she realized Trina was right. She wasn't the same woman anymore. The old Marlena would have apologized, would have ended things with Kareem to keep the peace, would have put her daughter's comfort above her own happiness, but that woman was gone, burned away by betrayal and rebuilt by her own two hands. This new Marlena wore burgundy dresses and drank Egyptian tea and let herself feel things she'd been taught were wrong. This new Marlena laughed out loud and stated her opinions and didn't apologize for taking up space. And when Kareem called that night just to say goodnight, just to tell her he was thinking about her, she smiled into the phone and felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt alive. She felt like herself. And she felt like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to want something just because it made her happy, not because it was holy or proper or what everyone else expected. She fell asleep that night thinking about his smile, about the way he said her name, about the possibility of a future that looked nothing like her past. And for the first time since that night in the church parking lot, she felt something close to peace. Chapter 4, when the church found out. The rumors started like they always do in churches, whispered in bathroom stalls and parking lot prayer circles, spreading like wildfire through phone trees and group texts until everyone knew that Marlena Davis was dating a Muslim man. Sister Patricia saw them at the Ethiopian restaurant and told Deacon Williams, who told his wife, who told the women's ministry leader, who called an emergency prayer meeting to intercede for Marlena's soul. By Sunday morning, the story had grown legs and details that weren't true. People saying Marlena had converted to Islam, that she was wearing hijabs now, that she turned her back on Jesus completely. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter when scandal was more interesting. Gregory called her on Monday morning, his voice dripping with false concern, asking if they could meet to talk about some important matters regarding the divorce settlement. She agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. And when she arrived, he was already there, dressed in his best suit, like he was trying to remind her of who he used to be to her. He didn't waste time with small talk, just dove straight into attack mode, his voice low but intense, his eyes hard with something that looked like ownership. "You're embarrassing yourself, Marlena. Dating some Muslim man parading around town like you don't have any sense. People are talking. The church is concerned about your spiritual state." She sipped her coffee slowly, letting him finish, watching him work himself up the way he always did when he felt like he was losing control. When he finally stopped to breathe, she set down her cup and looked him dead in the eye. "Gregory, we're divorced. What I do with my life is none of your business. And it damn sure isn't the church's business. You lost the right to have an opinion about my choices when you decided to stick your tongue down that usher's throat." His face turned red, a vein pulsing in his forehead the way it did when he was about to lose his temper, and she saw his hands ball into fists on the table. "Watch your mouth, Marlena. Just because we're divorced doesn't mean you get to disrespect me. I'm still a man of God, still a pastor, still someone who deserves respect." She almost laughed. The audacity of him sitting there demanding respect after what he'd done, but she kept her face neutral, her voice calm. "Respect is earned, Gregory, and you stopped earning mine a long time ago. Now, if that's all you wanted to say, I have somewhere to be." She stood to leave, and he grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to stop her, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You think you can just walk away and start a new life like the last 30 years meant nothing? You think some Muslim man is going to treat you better than I did? He's using you, Marlena. Men like that, they got their own agenda. He probably just wants a green card or something, and you're too desperate and lonely to see it." She pulled her wrist free and looked at him with pity instead of anger, and that seemed to hurt him more than any word she could have said. "The saddest thing about you, Gregory, is that you think everyone operates like you do." Kareem is a kind, honest man who treats me like I matter. And I'm sorry you can't understand what that looks like because you never did it yourself." She walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. The church's response was swift and coordinated, like they'd been planning it. Her daughter started getting calls from church members, people telling them their mother was in spiritual danger, that she needed an intervention, that dating outside the faith was a one-way ticket to hell. Her sister Denise called from South Carolina, crying and begging Marlena to come to her senses, quoting scriptures about being unequally yoked and asking what their dead mother would think. Even her old friends from the women's ministry group, women she'd prayed with and cried with and done life with for decades, sent her a group text telling her they loved her, but couldn't support her relationship with Kareem, that they'd be praying for her to return to the path of righteousness. She read every message, felt every word land like a stone, and then she did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. She muted the group chat, blocked the numbers that wouldn't stop calling, and chose herself. She chose the peace she'd found with Kareem over the chaos disguised as concern. She chose the version of faith that made room for love in unexpected places over the version that built walls and called them holy. Kareem noticed she was quieter than usual when they met for lunch that Thursday, saw the weight she was carrying even though she tried to hide it, and he reached across the table to take her hand. "Talk to me," he said, and those 3 words broke something open in her. She told him everything, the calls and texts and accusations, the way her whole community had turned on her, the way even her own daughters were questioning her judgment. She told him she was tired, so tired of fighting, tired of defending herself, tired of being treated like her choices were everyone's business. He listened without interrupting, his thumb making small circles on her hand. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. "Marlena, I need you to hear me. I care about you deeply, more than I thought I could care about anyone after losing my wife. But I don't want to be the reason you lose your family or your peace. If this relationship is causing you more pain than joy, we can slow down. We can take a step back. I will not be the man who costs you everything." She looked at him and saw he meant it, saw that he was willing to sacrifice what they were building if it meant protecting her. And in that moment, she knew something with absolute certainty. No, she said, and her voice was strong, clear, unshakable. "I'm not slowing down and I'm not stepping back. For 30 years, I've made myself small to keep other people comfortable. I swallowed my voice, my dreams, my own desires, because I thought that's what good Christian women did. I thought that's what love looked like. But being with you has taught me something, Kareem. Love isn't supposed to diminish you. It's supposed to expand you. You make me feel bigger, braver, more like myself than I've ever been. And if my family and my church can't see that, can't celebrate that, then that's their loss, not mine." His eyes got bright with emotion and he squeezed her hand tighter. "You're sure?" he asked, "because once we commit to this, once we really step into this together, there's no going back. Your life is going to change in ways we can't predict. People you love are going to walk away. Are you ready for that?" She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, standing in that parking lot watching her marriage implode. She thought about the woman she'd become, the one who wore burgundy dresses and stated her opinions and chose herself. And she smiled. "I've already lost everything once, Kareem. I'm not afraid of losing it again. I'm only afraid of losing myself. And when I'm with you, I feel more like me than I ever did in that church." He stood up and pulled her into his arms right there in the restaurant, and she let herself be held, let herself feel safe, let herself believe that maybe happy endings weren't just for fairy tales. Chapter 5. Meeting Amar, Kareem's daughter, arrived from Boston on a cold Friday in November, and Marlena was more nervous than she'd been in years. Amar was 26, brilliant, almost finished with medical school and deeply protective of her father. They video chatted twice, but this was different. This was meeting in person, looking each other in the eye, trying to figure out if they could build something real. Karim picked Marlena up early that morning, his hands nervous on the steering wheel, and drove them to the small house he rented in a quiet neighborhood where all the lawns were perfectly maintained and American flags hung from front porches. The house was neat and spare, decorated with a mix of American and Egyptian touches, photographs of Cairo on the walls next to framed quotes from the Quran in beautiful Arabic script. Amara opened the door before they could knock, and Marlena's first thought was that she looked exactly like the photos of Karim's late wife. The same warm brown skin and intelligent eyes and confident smile. Sundin, they hugged awkwardly, both trying too hard. And then Amara stepped back and really looked at Marlena. "So you're the woman who's got my dad wearing cologne and smiling at his phone like a teenager," Amara said. And there was something in her voice that wasn't quite friendly, not yet. Marlena smiled, deciding to be honest instead of polite. "And you're the daughter he talks about so much, I feel like I know your whole life story. He's very proud of you." Amara's expression softened slightly, but her guard was still up, her body language protective. They went inside and Karim made Egyptian coffee, the thick, sweet kind that you sip slowly, and they sat in his living room, making careful conversation about safe topics, books, and the weather, and how Boston winters compared to Richmond ones. But underneath the politeness, Marlena could feel Amara studying her, measuring her, trying to figure out if she was real or just another woman looking to take advantage of a lonely widower. After about an hour of this careful dance, Amara set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Marlena. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. And Marlena nodded. Why my father? You're coming out of a long marriage, you're dealing with a divorce, you've got your own faith in your own community. Why complicate your life with a Muslim man who's got his own grief and his own complications? The question was direct and fair, and Marlena appreciated that Amara wasn't pretending to be okay with something she clearly had questions about. She took a breath and answered honestly, "Because he sees me, not who I was supposed to be, not the role I played for 30 years, but actually me. He listens when I talk, he challenges me to think deeper, he makes me laugh, and he treats me with a respect I didn't know I was missing until I found it. I'm not with him because it's easy or because it makes sense to anyone else. I'm with him because when I'm with him, I feel like I can breathe." Amara's eyes stayed hard for a moment, and then something shifted. "My mother was everything to him," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "When she died, I watched him almost die too. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything. It took him 2 years to even smile again. I'm not trying to be harsh, Mrs. Davis, but I need to know you're serious about this. I need to know you're not just using him to get over your ex or to rebel against your church or whatever. Because if you hurt him, if you break his heart, I don't know if he'll survive it." The raw love in Amara's voice, the fierce protection, made Marlena respect her even more. She leaned forward, her own voice steady and sure. "I understand why you're worried, and I respect you for asking, but you need to understand something too. I'm not a woman who makes decisions lightly. I spent 30 years in a marriage where I was invisible, where I sacrificed everything for a man who didn't value me. I'm not doing that again. I'm with your father because he's extraordinary, because he's kind and thoughtful and real. I don't know what our future looks like, and I'm not going to sit here and make promises about forever, because life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you that every day I choose him, I'm choosing him with my whole heart, and I would never, ever hurt him intentionally." There was a long silence where Amara just looked at her, and Marlena held her gaze, not backing down, not apologizing for her truth. Then Amara did something unexpected. She smiled, a real smile this time, and nodded. "Okay," she Okay, I believe you. And for what it's worth, I haven't seen my dad this happy since my mom was alive. So thank you for that. The rest of the weekend was easier, the tension melting into something warmer and more genuine. They cooked together, Amara teaching Marlena how to make proper mashi, stuffed grape leaves that took hours of patient rolling and folding. They talked about everything, medicine and faith, and what it meant to be a woman in spaces that didn't always make room for you. Amara told stories about her mother, about the way she fought cancer with grace and courage, about the last conversation they'd had where her mother had made Amara promise to make sure Karim didn't stay alone forever. She said, "Your father has too much love to keep it locked up in grief. When he's ready, when he finds someone, don't you dare stand in his way," Amara said, her eyes wet. I didn't think I'd be able to keep that promise. I didn't think anyone could measure up to her, but watching you two together, I think she'd approve. I think she'd like you. Marlena felt tears on her own face, touched by the generosity of this young woman who was choosing to trust her with her father's heart. On Sunday afternoon, before Amar's flight back to Boston, the three of them sat in Karim's living room drinking tea, and Amara suddenly said me mute. "Marlena, can I ask you about your faith? Dad says you're Christian, but you don't seem bothered that he's Muslim. How does that work?" It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but most people were too polite or too judgmental to actually say out loud. Marlena set down her tea and thought about how to answer. "I think faith is more complicated than most people make it," she said slowly. "I was raised to believe that there was only one right way to worship God, one right way to live, one right path, and for a long time I believed that. But then I watched people use that same faith to justify cruelty and control and judgment. I watched my ex-husband stand in a pulpit and preach about love while treating me like I didn't matter. And I realized that what I believed about God and what I'd been taught by the church weren't always the same thing." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I'm with your father, when I hear him talk about Allah and submission and seeking peace, I hear echoes of the Jesus I fell in love with as a girl. Not the version the church sold me, but the real one. The one who challenged religious leaders and loved outcasts and told women they had value. I think God is bigger than our boxes, bigger than our denominations, bigger than our need to be right. And I think love, real love, is always holy no matter what package it comes in." Amara was quiet for a long moment, and then she reached over and squeezed Marlena's hand. "You know what? I think you and my dad are perfect for each other. You're both too smart for your own good, you both overthink everything, and you both have this way of seeing the divine in unexpected places. My mom would have loved debating theology with you." Karim laughed, the sound warm and full of relief, and pulled both women into a hug. That night, after Karim dropped Amara at the airport and drove Marlena home, they sat in his car outside her house, not wanting the weekend to end. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being so patient with her, for being so honest. Amara means everything to me, and I couldn't move forward with you if she couldn't accept us." Marlena turned to look at him, this man who'd somehow slipped past all her defenses and made her believe in love again. "She's extraordinary," Marlena said. "You raised her well, and I meant what I said to her. I'm serious about this, Karim, about us. I know it's complicated and messy, and there are 1,000 reasons why it doesn't make sense, but I don't care. I want this. I want you." He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise, and when he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Then let's stop being careful. Let's stop worrying about what everyone else thinks. Let's just be us." She nodded, and in that moment, sitting in a car outside her house, with this beautiful, kind man looking at her like she hung the moon, Marlena Davis decided she was done apologizing for choosing happiness. Chapter 6, The proposal that wouldn't Christmas came and went with Marlena spending it at Kareem's house instead of with her daughters for the first time in her life. Shanice had invited her to Atlanta, but Trina made it clear that if Marlena brought Kareem, she wasn't welcome, and Marlena refused to come without him. So she celebrated with Kareem and Amara instead, eating Egyptian food and watching American Christmas movies and feeling like maybe chosen family was just as valid as blood family. Gregory sent her a text on Christmas Eve saying he was praying for her soul, and she blocked his number without responding. The new year arrived with snow and possibility, and by February, Marlena and Kareem had fallen into a rhythm that felt like forever, even though it had only been 5 months. They saw each other almost every day, had keys to each other's homes, knew each other's coffee orders and weird habits and secret fears. Her co-workers at the library had met him and loved him. His friends from the mosque had met her and welcomed her with the kind of warmth that made her eyes water. They were building something real, something that felt solid and true, and Marlena had never been happier. Then, one Friday night in mid-February, Kareem took her to their favorite Ethiopian restaurant, the same place they'd had their first dinner, and he was nervous in a way she'd never seen before. He kept fumbling with his napkin, checking his phone, starting sentences and not finishing them. Finally, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Kareem, what's going on? You're making me nervous." He took a deep breath and looked at her with those kind eyes that had first captured her attention, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking slightly. "Marlena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear me, not just react, okay?" She nodded, her heart starting to pound because she knew what was coming, could see it in the way he was looking at her, and she wasn't sure she was ready. "I love you," he said. "I love you in a way I didn't think I could love anyone after my wife died. You've brought light back into my life, made me believe in second chances, made me laugh and think and feel alive again. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you, Marlena. I want to marry you." She felt her breath catch, felt tears start to form, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to leap into this beautiful future he was offering. But another part, the part that had been burned before, the part that was still healing, that part hesitated. "Kareem," she said slowly, carefully, "I love you too. You have to know that. But marriage scares me. I was married for 30 years and I lost myself completely. I became this thing that existed to serve someone else. And it took me losing everything to find myself again. I don't know if I can do that again, even with you, even knowing you're different." He nodded like he'd expected this, like he'd prepared for it. "I'm not asking you to lose yourself, Marlena. I'm asking you to choose us. And I know marriage means something different to you because of what you went through, but it doesn't have to be like that. We can build something new, something where we're both whole people choosing each other every day, not one person sacrificing for the other." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that it could be different this time, but the fear was loud in her head, screaming all the ways it could go wrong. "I need time," she said, and she saw disappointment flash across his face before he hit it. "I'm not saying no, Kareem. I'm just saying I need time to figure out what marriage would even look like for me now. I need to know I can say yes without losing the Marlena I just found." He squeezed her hand and tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I understand," he said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." But something had shifted between them that night. A small crack in the foundation they'd been building, and Marlena went home feeling guilty and confused and angry at herself for not being able to just be happy. Over the next few weeks, the unspoken proposal hung between them like a ghost. They still saw each other, still laughed and talked and held hands, but there was a new carefulness, a new weight. Kareem didn't bring it up again, but she could feel him waiting, hoping, and she felt the pressure of his hope like a stone on her chest. Her daughters noticed the change when they called, heard something off in her voice, and for once, Trina was the one who pushed. "Mama, what's wrong? And don't tell me nothing, 'cause I know you." Marlena found herself telling both her daughters about the proposal, about her fear, about feeling torn between wanting this beautiful life with Kareem and being terrified of losing herself again. There was silence on the line, and then Shanice spoke first. "Mama, I hear you. I hear your fear, and it's valid after what Daddy put you through, but I've seen you with Kareem. I've heard you talk about him. You're different with him. You're more yourself, not less. Maybe the question isn't whether you should marry him. Maybe the question is whether you trust yourself enough to know the difference between a man who sees you and a man who wants to own you." Her words hit Marlena like a revelation, and she felt something click into place. "You're right," Marlena said slowly. "You're absolutely right. This isn't about Kareem. This is about me trusting myself." Then Trina surprised her by saying, "Mama, I'm sorry. I've been so busy being mad at you for changing that I didn't stop to think about why you had to change. Daddy hurt you bad, and you deserve to be happy. If this man makes you happy, if he treats you right, then I'm happy for you, and I'd like to meet him." That night, Marlena called Kareem and asked him to come over. When he arrived, she could see the hope and fear warring on his face, and she pulled him inside and sat him down on her couch. "I have an answer," she said, and she watched him brace himself. "But first I need you to understand something. I'm saying yes, but I'm saying yes on my own terms. I need us to go to couples counseling before we get married, not because I think we're broken, but because I want us to build something healthy from the beginning. I need us to talk about expectations and boundaries and what marriage means to both of us. I need to know that if I say I need space, you'll give it to me without taking it personally. I need to know that I can have my own money and my own friends and my own life, and you won't feel threatened by that. I need to know that you see me as your partner, not your property. Can you do that?" He was staring at her with his mouth slightly open, and then slowly a smile spread across his face, the brightest smile she'd ever seen. Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a yes," she said. And suddenly she was crying and laughing at the same time, and he was pulling her into his arms. And for the first time since he'd asked, she felt the fear quiet down. "I want to marry you," she said into his chest. "I want to build a life with you, but I need you to understand that I'm not the same woman who got married 30 years ago. I'm not going to be a traditional wife. I'm going to be loud and opinionated, and I'm going to challenge you and probably drive you crazy sometimes." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes wet with happy tears. "Good," he said. "I don't want a traditional wife. I want you exactly as you are, loud and brilliant and challenging and perfect. I want all of you, Marlena. The messy parts and the scared parts and the parts that are still healing. All of it." She kissed him then, deep and long and full of promise. And when they pulled apart, she said, "So when do you want to do this?" He laughed. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next year. I don't care as long as at the end of it, you're my wife." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Let's start with counseling, and then let's tell our families, and then let's figure out the rest together." That night, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong, Marlena Davis felt something she'd been chasing her whole life. She felt free. Chapter 7, The Fire at the Church. The engagement announcement should have been a joyful thing, but Marlena knew it would be a storm. She called her daughters first, and Shanice screamed with excitement while Trina cried happy tears and apologized again for being so resistant. They planned a small family dinner in March where Trina would finally meet Kareem, and for the first time in months, Marlena felt like maybe her family was healing. She told her sister Denise next, and the call went about as well as expected, with Denise quoting scripture and crying and saying she'd keep praying for Marlena's soul. Her co-workers at the library threw her an impromptu engagement party with cheap champagne and a grocery store cake, and Destiny hugged her so tight Marlena couldn't breathe, whispering, "You deserve this, sis. You deserve every bit of happiness. But Marlena knew the real test was still coming. The reaction from the church community, from Gregory, from the people who'd known her as First Lady for 3 decades. She didn't plan to tell them directly, but in a city like Richmond, news traveled fast, especially scandalous news about a pastor's ex-wife marrying a Muslim man. The rumors hit the church like a bomb on a Sunday morning, spreading through the pews and parking lot with righteous indignation and pearl-clutching shock. By Monday, Gregory was calling everyone he knew, ranting about Marlena's betrayal, about how she was embarrassing him in the ministry, about how she needed to be stopped. On Tuesday, someone spray-painted Jezebel on Marlena's garage door in bright red letters, and she filed a police report knowing nothing would come of it. On Wednesday, she got a call from Patricia, her lawyer, saying Gregory was trying to reopen the divorce settlement, claiming that her relationship with Kareem proved she'd been unfaithful during their marriage, which was ridiculous and had no legal basis, but it showed how far he was willing to go to punish her. By Thursday, Marlena was exhausted from the constant attacks, from the hate messages and scripture-laced threats, and former friends telling her she was going to hell. Kareem held her while she cried, his own anger barely contained, and he asked her if it was worth it, if she wanted to reconsider, but she shook her head fiercely. No, she said, I'm not giving them that power. I'm not letting Gregory win again. Then on Friday night, Marlena got a call from a number she didn't recognize at 11:30. When she answered, a young woman's voice, shaking and scared, said, "Mrs. Davis, this is Keisha. I used to be in the youth ministry at New Hope. I need to tell you something." Marlena sat up, suddenly alert, and said, "Keisha, honey, what's wrong?" There was a pause, and then Keisha said, "Pastor Gregory, he's been saying things about you at church, terrible things. He's telling people you were the problem in the marriage, that you were cold and unfaithful, that you're mentally unstable." In the night during prayer meeting, he said that sometimes God has to intervene when his children go astray. He said that sometimes the old has to burn away so the new can grow. No, Mrs. Davis, I think he's planning something. I think you need to be careful. Marlena's blood went cold, and she thanked Keisha and immediately called Kareem. But before he could answer, she heard sirens in the distance getting closer. She walked to her front window and saw the orange glow on the horizon, saw the smoke rising black against the night sky, and somehow she knew before the news alert came through on her phone. New Hope Baptist Church was on fire. She drove there without thinking, pulled by some instinct she couldn't name. And when she arrived, the parking lot was full of fire trucks and police cars and church members standing in clusters, crying and praying and watching their sanctuary burn. The flames were massive, eating through the roof and shooting out the stained glass windows, and the heat was so intense she couldn't get within 50 feet of the building. Someone grabbed her arm, and she turned to see Sister Patricia, her face streaked with soot and tears, and the older woman pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank God you're safe," Patricia whispered. "When I saw the fire, I thought maybe someone had..." She didn't finish, but Marlena understood. She thought maybe someone had targeted Marlena's house, had tried to hurt her physically. Marlena looked around the crowd and didn't see Gregory anywhere, and a cold suspicion started forming in her gut. She found a young firefighter and asked, "Was anyone inside?" He shook his head. "Building was empty when we got here. Looks like it started in the pastor's office. Accelerant used, definitely arson." Her suspicion solidified into certainty, and she pulled out her phone to call the police. Before she could dial, Gregory appeared from behind a fire truck, his face smudged with smoke, his clothes disheveled, and he was crying real tears, dramatic tears. And he fell to his knees in front of the burning church, arms raised like he was in prayer. and his voice rang out over the crowd. "Satan has attacked our church. The enemy has tried to destroy what God has built, but we will not be moved. We will rebuild. We will be stronger." People gathered around him, laying hands on him, praying over him, and Marlena watched the performance with cold clarity. She saw the way his eyes flicked to her in the crowd, saw the smirk he couldn't quite hide, and she knew he'd done this. He'd burned his own church, probably for insurance money, probably to drum up sympathy, probably to distract from the scandal of her engagement. It was exactly the kind of manipulative, narcissistic move he would make. And she felt rage burn through her, hotter than the flames consuming the building. She pushed through the crowd and stood in front of him, and her voice cut through his prayer like a knife. "You did this?" The crowd went silent. Gregory looked up at her with fake confusion, fake hurt. "Marlena, what are you talking about? How could you accuse me at a time like this?" She didn't back down. "You set this fire? I know you did, and I'm going to prove it." The police questioned everyone that night, and Marlena told them about Keisha's call, about Gregory's threats, about the pattern of escalation. They took her statement, but she could see they didn't believe her, not really. Gregory was the victim here, the beloved pastor whose church had been destroyed. Why would he burn his own sanctuary? She went home at 3 a.m, covered in soot and smoke smell, and Kareem was waiting on her porch, his face etched with worry. He held her and she told him everything, and he listened with his jaw tight with anger. "We need to be careful," he said. "If he did this, if he's really that unstable, there's no telling what he might do next." She nodded, but she wasn't afraid. She was done being afraid of Gregory. For the next week, the church fire was all anyone talked about. The news covered it, showing Gregory's tearful interviews about rebuilding and faith and overcoming adversity. Donations poured in from churches across the state. Gregory set up a GoFundMe that raised over $100,000 in 3 days. And Marlena watched it all with growing fury, knowing he was profiting from his own crime, knowing he was using people's faith and generosity to line his own pockets while painting himself as a martyr. Then on Thursday, Patricia called her with news that made everything stop. The fire marshal released his report. They found evidence of arson like we suspected, but they also found something else. Gregory's fingerprints on the gas can in his office. Security footage from the building next door showing him entering the church alone at 9:30 and leaving at 10:15. He's been arrested, Marlena. They're charging him with arson and insurance fraud. Marlena sat down hard on her couch, the news hitting her like a physical weight. She'd been right. She'd known it in her gut, but having proof was different. "Is it going to stick?" she asked. Patricia's voice was grim. "With the evidence they have? Absolutely. He's looking at serious prison time." That night, Marlena's phone blew up with messages, people apologizing, people saying they should have believed her, people suddenly remembering all the times Gregory had lied or manipulated or crossed lines. The deacon board released a statement removing Gregory from leadership. The church's insurance company announced they wouldn't be paying out. The whole empire Gregory had built came crashing down in a matter of hours, and Marlena felt no satisfaction, only sadness for all the years she'd wasted believing in a man who was never worth it. Kareem found her sitting in her living room in the dark that night, and he sat beside her without saying anything, just being there. Finally, she spoke. "I spent 30 years propping him up, believing in him, defending him, and the whole time he was exactly who he is now. I just didn't want to see it." Kareem took her hand. "You saw what you needed to see to survive. That's not weakness, Marlena. That's strength. And look at you now. Look at how far you've come. He tried to destroy you, and instead he destroyed himself. You won." She thought about that, about the woman she'd been standing in that parking lot, watching her husband kiss another woman, about the woman she was now, engaged to a man who saw her and loved her and respected her. "Yeah," she said slowly. "I guess I did." They sat there in the dark together, and for the first time since the fire, Marlena felt like she could breathe. Gregory's attempt to hurt her had backfired spectacularly, and now she was free, really free, to build the life she wanted without his shadow hanging over everything. The next morning, she woke up and made a decision. She was done looking back. She was done letting Gregory take up space in her head. She was marrying Kareem, and nothing and no one was going to stop her from claiming her happiness. Chapter 8, The Wedding That Broke Every Rule. Marlena and Kareem decided to get married in April, just 2 months after his proposal, and they agreed on something that felt radical to both their communities. They wanted a wedding that honored both their faiths, that made room for both their traditions, that celebrated the way love could build bridges instead of walls. They found a venue in a botanical garden, all glass and green growing things and light pouring through windows. And they hired an interfaith officiant who'd married couples from different religions before. They planned a ceremony that would include readings from both the Bible and the Quran, music from both gospel and Arabic traditions, and vows they wrote themselves that spoke to partnership and equality and choosing each other every day. It was unconventional and beautiful and exactly what they wanted. But planning it meant having difficult conversations with people who thought they were making a terrible mistake. Kareem's imam pulled him aside and expressed concerns about him marrying outside the faith, reminded him of the importance of raising children in Islam, questioned whether this was truly what Allah wanted for him. Kareem listened respectfully and then said something that surprised even himself. With respect, I believe Allah wants me to be happy. I believe Allah put Marlena in my path when I was drowning in grief and she brought me back to life. I believe love is holy no matter what form it takes. And if that means I'm not the perfect Muslim in your eyes, then I accept that, but I won't give her up. The imam was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I pray Allah blesses your union, he said. And though his voice held reservation, it also held resignation. Marlena had her own battles to fight, particularly with her daughters who had questions about logistics and faith and what it would mean for any future grandchildren. Shanice was practical, asking about where they'd live and how holidays would work, and whether Marlena was really prepared for the cultural differences that would come with marrying outside her community. Trina was more emotional, worried about her mother's soul, about whether this was really what God wanted, about whether Marlena had thought this through or was just rebelling against everything she'd known. Marlena sat both her daughters down during a video call and spoke to them from her heart. Girls, I hear your concerns and I love you for caring about me, but I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to rebel or to make a point or to run from my past. I'm doing this because Kareem is the best man I've ever known. He treats me with respect and kindness. He listens to me and challenges me and makes me want to be better. He sees me, really sees me, and he loves what he sees. I spent 30 years in a marriage where I was invisible, and I'm not going back to that. Not for anyone, not for anything. She took a breath, her voice steady. As for faith and grandchildren and all of that, we'll figure it out together. We've already talked about how we'll honor both our traditions, how we'll teach any children we might have about both Christianity and Islam, and let them choose their own path when they're old enough. We've talked about boundaries and expectations and what marriage means to both of us. This isn't something we're rushing into blindly. This is something we've thought about carefully, and we're choosing it with our eyes wide open. Shanice nodded slowly. Okay, Mama, if you're sure, then I'm behind you. Trina was crying, but she said, I trust you, Mama, and I want to be there. I want to be at your wedding. The month leading up to the wedding was a whirlwind of planning and pushback. Gregory, out on bail awaiting trial, made one last attempt to stop the wedding, filing a motion claiming Marlena was mentally incompetent and needed a psychological evaluation before she could legally marry. Patricia shot it down so fast it never made it to a hearing, and she called Marlena laughing. That man is desperate and pathetic. The judge literally threw out his motion and told him to stop wasting the court's time. Marlena felt a small surge of victory, another brick in the wall she was building between her old life and her new one. Her sister Denise surprised her 2 weeks before the wedding by calling to say she'd be coming, that she didn't understand Marlena's choices, but she loved her and wanted to support her. "Mama would have wanted me to be there," Denise said, her voice thick. "Even if she wouldn't have approved, she would have wanted family to stick together." Marlena cried when she hung up, touched by the unexpected grace, by the way love could survive even when agreement couldn't. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, sunny and warm, with a breeze that smelled like flowers and possibility. Marlena got ready at home with Shanice and Trina helping, and she wore a dress she'd chosen herself, cream-colored and simple and elegant. Nothing like the big white dress she'd worn 30 years ago when she married Gregory. This dress felt like her, like the woman she'd become, strong and beautiful and unapologetic. Her daughters both cried when they saw her, telling her she looked radiant. And Trina said, "Mama, I've never seen you look so happy. You're glowing." Marlena looked at herself in the mirror and realized her daughter was right. She was happy, deeply and completely happy, in a way she'd never been before. When she arrived at the venue, she was overwhelmed by the beauty of it, the way the botanical garden had been transformed into a sacred space that honored both her and Kareem's traditions. There were flowers everywhere, roses and jasmine and orange blossoms, and the guests were a beautiful mix of her people and his people, her Black American friends and family sitting beside his Egyptian and Muslim friends, everyone dressed in their finest, everyone there to witness something extraordinary. Kareem stood at the front waiting for her, wearing a dark suit and a huge smile, and when their eyes met, she felt her heart skip. Amara stood beside him as his best woman, wearing a beautiful hijab and beaming with joy. Shanice and Trina stood on Marlena's side, both wearing burgundy dresses the color of new beginnings. And when Marlena reached the front and took Kareem's hands, she felt like everything in her life had led to this moment. The ceremony was everything they'd hoped for. The officiant reading from both their sacred texts, talking about love as a force that transcends boundaries, that builds bridges, that makes all things new. When it was time for vows, Kareem went first, his voice clear and strong. "Marlena, you came into my life when I'd given up hope. You showed me that it's possible to love again, to trust again, to believe in second chances. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful. And I promise to honor you, to respect you, to walk beside you as your equal and partner. I promise to love you in the quiet moments and the storm moments, in the joy and the struggle. I promise to see you, really see you every single day. This I vow before God and everyone we love." Marlena's turn came, and she'd written her vows in the middle of the night a week ago, unable to sleep because the words kept flooding through her. "Kareem, you saved my life, not because you rescued me, but because you saw me when I was invisible. You taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that partnership can be real, that it's possible to be myself and be loved for it. You challenged everything I thought I knew about faith and culture and what's possible when we're brave enough to cross lines that were never supposed to exist. I promise to love you with my whole heart, to honor your faith and your traditions, to build a life with you that's bigger than what either of us could build alone. I promise to be your partner in all things, your equal in all things, your love in all things. This I vow before God and everyone we love." When the officiant pronounced them married, Kareem kissed her with tears streaming down his face, and the whole crowd erupted in cheers and applause that felt like blessing and celebration and radical acceptance all at once. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, husband and wife, and Marlena felt lighter than air, like she was flying, like she'd finally found the life she was always meant to live. At the reception, they danced to both American and Arabic music, ate food from both their cultures, and gave speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. Amara toasted them, saying her mother was smiling down from heaven, proud of her father for choosing love over fear. Trina toasted them, apologizing for her initial resistance, and telling Kareem he better take care of her mama or he'd have to answer to her. And when Marlena and Kareem had their first dance, he whispered in her ear, "Are you happy?" She pulled back to look at him, this man who'd given her permission to be herself, and she smiled. "I'm more than happy," she said. "I'm free." Chapter 9, The Trial and the Truth. 2 months after the wedding, Gregory's trial began, and Marlena knew she'd have to face him in court. The prosecutor had subpoenaed her to testify about Gregory's behavior leading up to the fire, about the threats and harassment, about his pattern of manipulation and control. She didn't want to go, didn't want to relive any of it, but Patricia convinced her it was necessary. "Your testimony's going to seal this case," Patricia said. "He's already facing arson and insurance fraud charges, but your testimony adds context. It shows motive. It shows pattern of behavior. You can help put him away, Marlena." So, on a hot June morning, Marlena walked into the courthouse with Kareem beside her, and she felt every eye in the room turn to stare. Gregory was already seated at the defense table with his lawyer, and when she walked in, he looked at her with pure hatred, his face twisted with rage that he didn't bother to hide. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Morrison, called Marlena to the stand and walked her through the timeline of her marriage, the divorce, the escalating threats, the fire. Marlena answered every question honestly, her voice steady even when talking about the most painful parts. She described finding Gregory with the usher, described the church's response, described the way he'd used his position and influence to isolate her and punish her for leaving. She described his reaction to her relationship with Kareem, the threats and harassment and constant attempts to control her even after the divorce. And she described Keisha's warning call, the way Gregory had talked about things needing to burn before they could grow new. When she finished, the courtroom was silent, and she could see several jurors looking at Gregory with disgust. Then it was the defense attorney's turn, a slick man in an expensive suit who clearly thought he could intimidate her. He started with questions designed to paint her as vindictive, as a woman scorned who was making up stories to hurt her ex-husband. "Mrs. Davis, or should I say Mrs. Hassan now, isn't it true that you were angry at Pastor Gregory for the dissolution of your marriage?" Marlena looked at him calmly. "I was hurt by his infidelity, yes. Any wife would be." "And isn't it true that you started a relationship with another man very quickly after your separation, suggesting that perhaps you were the one who was unfaithful during the marriage?" Patricia objected. Before Marlena could answer, the objection was sustained, but Marlena asked if she could respond anyway. The judge nodded, and Marlena leaned forward slightly. "I met my husband 4 months after I filed for divorce. My relationship with him has nothing to do with Gregory's decision to commit arson and insurance fraud. You trying to make me the villain here doesn't change the fact that your client burned down his own church." The defense attorney's face went red and he tried a different tack. "Mrs. Hassan, isn't it true that you have a bias against my client because he disapproved of your relationship with a Muslim man?" Marlena smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Your client disapproved of anything that didn't give him control over me. Yes, he had problems with my relationship with Kareem, but he also had problems with me working, having my own bank account, making my own decisions. This isn't about religion. This is about a man who couldn't handle losing power." The lawyer tried for another hour to shake her testimony, but Marlena held firm. And when she finally stepped down, she felt victorious. The trial lasted 3 days, and the evidence against Gregory was overwhelming. The fire marshal testified about the accelerant and the fingerprints. The security footage was shown, clearly depicting Gregory entering and leaving the church. Financial experts testified about his money problems, about the insurance policy he'd increased 6 months before the fire, about the GoFundMe donations he'd already started spending on personal expenses, and former church members testified about his threats against Marlena. about the way he'd been spiraling, about his comments during prayer meeting the night of the fire. When it was Gregory's turn to testify, he tried to maintain his innocent pastor persona, but Angela Morrison tore him apart on cross-examination. She got him to admit he'd been in the church that night, got him to contradict himself multiple times, got him to lose his temper and show the jury the real Gregory, the angry, controlling man behind the pulpit. By the time she was done, even Gregory's own lawyer looked defeated. The closing arguments were powerful. Angela painting a picture of a narcissistic man who'd rather burn everything down than admit he wasn't in control, and the defense attorney making a weak argument about reasonable doubt that convinced no one. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they came back, Marlena was sitting in the gallery with Kareem, holding his hand so tight her fingers hurt. The foreperson stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Gregory's face went pale, then red, and he started to stand like he was going to say something, but the bailiffs were already moving to restrain him. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks out, and Gregory was led away in handcuffs, and as he passed Marlena's row, he looked at her one last time. She expected to see rage or hatred, but instead she saw something worse. She saw a broken man who destroyed himself, who lost everything because he couldn't let go of control, and she felt nothing but pity. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them asking for comments, and Marlena made a brief statement. Justice was served today. I hope this case shows people that abuse comes in many forms, and that leaving an abusive situation is an act of courage, not weakness. I hope any woman watching this who's in a similar situation knows that there's life after leaving, that happiness is possible, that you deserve better. Kareem wrapped his arm around her and they walked to the car together, and she felt like a chapter had finally closed. 2 weeks later, at sentencing, Gregory got 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. The judge's comments were scathing, talking about the betrayal of trust, about using faith as a weapon, about the danger of unchecked ego. Marlena wasn't there for the sentencing, didn't need to be. She'd already moved on, already built a new life, and she refused to give Gregory any more of her time and energy. She and Karim had their own things to focus on now, like the house they were buying together, a beautiful old Victorian that needed work but had good bones, and a big backyard perfect for the garden they wanted to plant. Like the counseling they were still doing, working through the normal challenges of the blending lives and faiths and expectations. Like the plans they were making for Amar's graduation from medical school in the fall. How proud they were of her, how excited they were to celebrate. That night, after the sentencing, Marlena and Kareem sat on their new porch watching the sunset, and he asked her how she felt. She thought about it for a long time before answering. I feel free, she finally said. Really, truly free. For the first time in my whole life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He kissed her temple, and they sat there in comfortable silence, and Marlena thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that parking lot betrayal to this porch peace, from pastor's wife to her own woman, from invisible to seen, from controlled to free. It had been painful and messy and hard, but it had also been necessary. She had to lose everything to find herself, had to walk through fire to discover what she was made of. And what she discovered was that she was stronger than she ever knew, braver than she'd been taught to be, and worthy of a love that didn't ask her to shrink. Kareem had been part of that discovery, but he wasn't the source of it. She was. She'd saved herself, and then she'd chosen to share her life with someone who celebrated who she was instead of trying to change her. That, she realized, was what real love looked like. Not someone completing you, but someone seeing you complete and choosing to walk beside you anyway. As the sun set and the sky turned gold and purple and deep blue, Marlena Davis Hassan felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like peace, like purpose, like home. She'd made it. She'd survived. And now finally she was ready to truly live. Chapter 10, The Life She Built. A year after the trial, Marlena stood in her garden planting tomatoes while Kareem built a raised bed for herbs, and she marveled at how ordinary and extraordinary her life had become. They'd settled into a rhythm that felt natural, mornings drinking coffee on the porch, evenings cooking dinner together, weekends working on the house or exploring new restaurants or just being quiet together. She'd gotten promoted to head librarian at her branch, leading programs and managing staff and loving every minute of it. Kareem had started his own consulting firm, finally breaking free from the corporate job that had been draining him. They were building lives they loved, separately and together, and it felt like everything she'd been searching for without knowing what she was looking for. Her relationships with her daughters had deepened too. Both Shanice and Trina visiting regularly, bringing their families, letting their children run around the backyard while the adults sat on the porch, drinking sweet tea and laughing at old stories. Trina had apologized multiple times for her initial resistance, and she and Kareem had developed their own relationship, him teaching her daughter Arabic phrases and her teaching him how to make proper collard greens. Amara had graduated medical school and was doing her residency in Richmond, choosing to be close to her father and Marlena, and the three of them had family dinners every Sunday that felt sacred and joyful. Marlena had never expected to be a stepmother at 56, but Amara had become like a daughter to her, the two of them shopping together and sharing recipes and having long talks about faith and identity and what it meant to be women forging their own paths. Amara called her Mama Marlena now, and every time she said it, Marlena's heart swelled with gratitude for this unexpected family she'd gained. Her sister Denise had come around too, slowly warming to Kareem after meeting him several times and seeing how happy Marlena was. They'd never agree on theology, but they'd found a way to love each other anyway, and that felt like its own kind of miracle. The church world had mostly forgotten about her, moved on to newer scandals and dramas, and Marlena was grateful for the obscurity. A few former friends had reached out to apologize, to say they'd been wrong, to ask if they could rebuild their friendships, and Marlena had been gracious but boundaried. She forgave them, but she didn't forget, and she was careful about who she let back into her inner circle. One August evening, Marlena got an unexpected visit from Keisha, the young woman who'd warned her about Gregory before the fire. Keisha was 23 now, working as a social worker, and she asked if they could talk. They sat on the porch with lemonade, and Keisha told her story, how she'd been one of Gregory's victims too, how he'd groomed her when she was 17 under the guise of spiritual mentorship, how he'd manipulated her into keeping secrets and believing his attention was love. She'd spent years in therapy working through the trauma, and she'd come to thank Marlena for speaking up, for testifying, for helping put him in prison. "You saved other girls from going through what I went through," Keisha said, tears streaming down her face. "Your courage gave me courage. You showed me it was okay to tell the truth, even when the truth makes people uncomfortable." Marlena hugged her and they both cried, and afterward Marlena felt like another piece of her healing had clicked into place. She hadn't just saved herself by leaving Gregory. She'd helped save others too, had broken a cycle, had shown light in dark places. That realization led to something new. Marlena started a support group for women leaving religious abuse, meeting once a week at the library with women from all different faiths who were trying to rebuild their lives after leaving controlling relationships disguised as godly marriages. She facilitated the group with a therapist friend, and they created a safe space where women could tell their stories without judgment, could cry and rage and heal together. The group grew quickly, women hungry for a place where they could be honest about their experiences, where they could question their faith without losing it, where they could find community outside the religious structures that had harmed them. Kareem supported the work fully, sometimes cooking meals for the women, sometimes just sitting in the parking lot reading a book so Marlena knew he was there if she needed him. He understood the importance of what she was doing, understood that her healing was connected to helping others heal, and he never once asked her to choose between him and her calling. That more than anything showed Marlena that she'd chosen the right partner, someone who saw her work in the world as essential, not threatening. By the time their second anniversary rolled around, Marlena and Karim had built something remarkable. Not a perfect life, because perfect didn't exist, but a real one, full of laughter and disagreement and compromise and deep abiding love. They still did couples counseling once a month, still had hard conversations about cultural differences and faith traditions and how to honor both their backgrounds. They developed their own spiritual practice, reading from both the Bible and Quran, praying in ways that felt authentic to both of them, attending both mosque and a progressive church that welcomed interfaith families. It was messy and beautiful and constantly evolving, and it was theirs. For their anniversary, they took a trip to Egypt, Karim wanting to show Marlena where he came from, and she fell in love with Cairo, with the chaos and beauty and ancient history of it. They visited the pyramids and the Egyptian museum. They ate street food and drank mint tea. They took a boat ride on the Nile at sunset, and Marlena understood why Karim had described the world as gold. It was. The whole world was gold when you were with someone who loved you well. On their last night in Cairo, sitting on a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, Karim took her hand and said, "Are you happy, Marlena? Really happy?" She looked at him, this beautiful man who'd loved her back to life, and she thought about the question. Was she happy? She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, invisible and small and dying inside. She thought about the journey she'd take, the pain and courage and transformation. She thought about the life she'd built, the work she was doing, the love she'd found, the family she'd created from broken pieces. And she realized the answer was simple. "I'm more than happy," she said, echoing the words she'd said on their wedding day. "I'm free, I'm seen, I'm loved, I'm myself, and that's everything." He smiled and kissed her hand, and they sat there watching the city lights twinkle like stars, two people from different worlds who'd built a bridge and called it home. That night, lying in bed in their Cairo hotel, Marlena thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd overcome, everything she'd become, and she felt proud, so deeply proud, of the woman staring back at her from her reflection. The next morning, flying home to Richmond, Marlena looked out the plane window at the clouds below and thought about the young girl she'd been, growing up in South Carolina, dreaming of a life that mattered. She thought about the young woman who'd married a charming pastor and believed she could change the world through service and sacrifice. She thought about the middle-aged woman who'd lost herself in someone else's vision and forgotten she had her own. And she thought about the woman she was now, 57 years old, and just beginning to understand what living meant. She thought her life was over when her marriage ended, thought she'd lost everything that mattered, but she'd been wrong. She hadn't lost anything. She shed a skin that no longer fit, had walked through fire and emerged transformed, had discovered that endings could be beginnings if you were brave enough to walk through them. She'd learned that love didn't have to hurt, that faith could expand instead of constrain, that it was never too late to choose yourself, that happiness was a revolution and claiming it was an act of radical courage. She reached for Karim's hand and he squeezed it without looking up from his book. And Marlena smiled, thinking about the life waiting for them back home, the garden and the library and the Sunday dinners and the support group and all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life well lived. As the plane began its descent into Richmond, Marlena whispered a prayer, not to the God of her childhood who demanded perfection, but to the God she discovered in her freedom, the one who celebrated her strength and blessed her courage and called her beloved exactly as she was. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for the fire that didn't consume me, for the loss that freed me, for the love that found me. Thank you for teaching me that I was always enough, that I was always worthy, that I was always exactly who I needed to be. Thank you for second chance and new beginnings and the courage to claim both. The plane touched down, and Marlena opened her eyes, ready to step back into her beautiful, messy, perfect for her life. She was a librarian and a support group leader and a friend and a daughter and a sister and a stepmother and a wife. But more than any of those roles, more than any title or position, she was simply and powerfully herself. She was Marlena Davis Hassan, a woman who'd been a pastor's wife for 30 years and then fell in love with a Muslim man, and in doing so fell in love with herself. And that, she thought, as they walked through the airport hand in hand, was the best love story of all.